Every week in synagogue, we read the Torah, we read the Old Testament, but we don't read it, we sing it. And the way in which we know how to sing it is because there are notes that are there to indicate how it is sung. And it is sung by everybody the same, everybody who's reading the Torah, wherever you are all over the world, and whichever Torah you're reading from, going to sing it the same way. But each of those notes has a name, and one of the notes is called a shalshelet, and it's a very rare note. It only appears in the Old Testament 4 times. And one of those is in our Torah portion, this week's Torah portion called Tzav. So I want to take us back to another place that this musical note appears. And it appears in the book of Genesis, and it appears in the story of Joseph. So if you remember, Joseph is the son of Jacob and the son of Rachel, and he is the beloved son of Jacob, and he is sold into slavery. He goes down to Egypt, and he finds his way in the house of Potiphar. Potiphar is the viceroy to the Pharaoh in Egypt, and he finds himself as taking care of the household of Potiphar. So we know that Potiphar's wife takes a liking to Joseph and wants to seduce him, and he resists her temptations. He resists his temptations until one day, this fateful day where there's no one else in the house, and it's just Joseph and Potiphar's wife, and she comes to seduce him, and he doesn't know what to do, and he runs away. He rejects her. He refuses her advances. The word refuse in Hebrew has above it this shalsheles, this note of going up and down and up and down and up and down 3 times. Shalshelet means a chain, and it looks like a little coil. It looks like a little snake. There's just a note that looks like a little coil going up. But the idea is that the long note, the up and down cadence of the note, indicates, say our commentators, that Joseph was in a state of inner turmoil, that it was hard for him to refuse. He knew it was the right thing to do, to run outside and not succumb to the advances of Potiphar. He knew it was the right thing to do, but he had an inner conflict. Perhaps he was attracted to her, whatever it was, that there was something that was a struggle for him. It wasn't so easy for him to refuse her advances. And yes, he knew that it would not be good for him, for Potiphar would not be happy with him, and he knew that for the home he came from, it was the wrong thing to do, and that God would be upset with him. And what tilts him to running outside and refusing the advances of Potiphar's wife is the Medrash teaches us that there was an image that he had of his father in the window, and he saw the image of his father, and he knew he couldn't do it, and he ran outside. But the point is that Joseph, as he's refusing Potiphar's wife, this shalshelet indicates to us that he had an inner turmoil. It was a struggle. It was not so easy for him to, it was difficult for him to refuse her. In this week's Torah portion, the shalshelet appears again. Moses is inaugurating the service in the temple, and he is going to give over to his brother Aaron and Aaron's descendants, to Aaron's sons, the priesthood. They're going to be the priests that are going to serve in the temple, in the tabernacle, and Moses is the one to inaugurate that and to consecrate and to bring into that and to give over to Aaron this role of being the priest. So take us back to the burning bush when Moses is speaking with God, and God says, you're going to be the one to bring the Jewish people out of Egypt. And he argues with God. And he says, no, I don't want to do it. And I'm hard of speech. I don't know how to speak properly. God says, don't worry, I'm going to send Aaron. And at that point, Aaron is given this priesthood, the role of the priesthood. So fast forward now, where we are in this week's Torah portion, where we're inaugurating the tabernacle, where it's time to give over to Aaron, that he will be the priest, that his descendants will have that lineage. And perhaps, says Rabbi Riskin, it's hard. There's an inner conflict, there's a turmoil, there's a hesitancy, there's a struggle not to do the right thing. Moses is going to do the right thing. He knows that he's going to be inaugurating the temple and that he's going to give to Aaron this role of the priesthood. It's not that he's not going to do it, but there's an inner struggle. It's not so easy. He's not doing it with his full heart. Perhaps there's a level of, I want this role and I want this to be what will be for my descendants, and it isn't, and he knows it isn't, and accepts it isn't, but there's that inner struggle, that turmoil of doing the right thing and having a little edge of and so the shalshelet appears again in this week's Torah portion. So the Torah portion is called Tzav, which means to command. Last week we had Vayikra, which was a calling. Moses is being called by God. There's a loving embrace, and he's speaking with God face to face. And now we have a language of commanding that Tzav, they're going to do this. You have to do it with alacrity. You have to do it as I say. This is what you have to do. And I wonder, in our makeup, that we have within us a tendency to not want to be told what to do. When somebody tells us what to do, we have like a knee-jerk reaction to say, no, I don't want to do what you're telling me to do, or I want to come to it on my own, or I have a visceral response to being commanded. And our tradition teaches that when we do something because we're commanded, it's a higher level of doing it than because we want to do it. And not that we shouldn't come to want to do it, but that we overcome that part of us, that knee-jerk reaction that says, no, I don't want to be told what to do. And when we overcome that and we do the right thing, that's a high level of doing, because we're doing it because we're commanded and we want the relationship with God that brings. So I'm wondering, when we look at the shalshelet that occurs in this week's Torah portion, and when we understand the response sometimes that we have to being commanded, that we can feel good about ourselves if we have a struggle. We see that Joseph has a struggle. We see that Moses perhaps has a struggle, as evidenced by the shalshelet that appears in these Torah portions that talk about the difficulty, perhaps the difficulty they had, the hesitancy, the inner turmoil, the emotional difficulty, struggle that they had to do the right thing. And so too, we may know what the right thing to do is, but we might have an inner struggle that we have to deal with, that we have to overcome. And we're in good company if we see that Moses had to overcome an inner struggle, and we see that Joseph also had to overcome an inner struggle. Another place that we see this shalshelet is when Eliezer, who is the servant, the helper of Abraham, our forefather, and he is sent on a mission to find a wife for his son Yitzchak. Abraham is sending Eliezer on a mission to find a wife for Abraham's son Yitzchak. And we understand that Eliezer wanted his daughter to be the bride to Yitzchak. And so when the shalshelet appears in his going out to search for a wife for Yitzchak, there's a hesitation on his part, that he's a little conflicted, because he as much as he's going to do it, and he does find a wife for Isaac in the form of Rebecca, but there's I want my daughter to be the wife of Yitzchak. So there's a hesitation also from Eliezer in that space. And the fourth time that the shalshelet appears in the Torah is in the story of Lot. So Lot, as we know, lived in the city of Sodom, which was destroyed, and Lot has to leave. He's told to leave with his wife and his children, and he hesitates. He doesn't leave right away. There's a hesitancy. There's a turmoil. There's a struggle for him leaving, and that's the fourth example of where this shalshelet appears. So our commentators teach us that the shalshelet is a indicator of hesitancy, of emotional turmoil, of difficulty of doing something. And each one of the people where this shalshelet appears, whether it's Eliezer, the servant of Abraham, whether it is Lot, or whether it is Joseph in the Potiphar's wife story, or whether it's Moses inaugurating and giving the priesthood to Aaron, that each one of those is where the shalshelet appears, and each one of those there's a hesitancy, there's a difficulty, there's an emotional turmoil that is caused that these people have to overcome in order to do the right thing. So when we overcome our inner struggle to do the right thing, we know what the right thing to do is, and sometimes it's hard for us to do it, that we know that we are in good company. Not that we shouldn't do the right thing, we should do the right thing, but to have that struggle is part of who we are as humans. And Moses, who was the most holy of all people and spoke to God face to face, he also has a shalshelet associated with him to indicate that there was an emotional turmoil and struggle that he had to go through, and a difficulty and a hesitancy that he had to go through to do the right thing.